From taking aim at Infinity War and Endgame, to being booted out of the MCU because of some rough tweets, I'm revealing James Gunn's most controversial moments, kicking off with his recent hot takes on Marvel's most successful movies, those being Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, two of the highest-grossing movies of all time. One of the best things about them was that they managed to bring in every character in the MCU, with Infinity War really nailing the feel of a war happening on Earth and in space at the same time. But with the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in 2023, Gunn dished on all sorts of stuff on the promo tour, and that included the way the Avengers two-parter used his Guardians characters. Though the screenwriters of those movies consulted with James on how to write them, they wound up doing a couple of things that he didn't approve of. The first was having Thanos kill Gamora in order to get the Soul Stone, and then bringing a version of her back from the past, leaving Gunn with a Gamora who didn't know or care about her fellow Guardians. He was even more annoyed about the way Star-Lord reacted after learning Gamora died, as he got emotional and screwed up Tony Stark's plan that was close to saving the universe. While it's easy to sympathize with someone else messing with your story, both of those were powerful scenes, so there was a pretty decent social media backlash against Gunn's complaints. As a director of movies, he has strong opinions on other people's work, and some of those opinions don't really make sense. Besides making awesome movies, James Gunn is famous for firing off on Twitter. That's exactly what happened when Twitter user King of Goo asked people for their controversial opinion, and Marvel's loose cannon fired away. His replied that Jackie Brown is the best Quentin Tarantino movie, while After Hours and Taxi Driver are Martin Scorsese's masterpieces, and The Bad Lieutenant Port of Call. New Orleans is a top 10 movie of the 20th century. The Taxi Driver thing isn't a hot take at all, but Jackie Brown is usually considered to be Tarantino's worst movie. So why would you pick that when he's also made Pulp Fiction and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? And as great as After Hours is Gunn really gonna overlook the likes of Raging Bull or Goodfellas? Finally, that last movie with the really long title is a well-regarded movie, but it doesn't really rank among the GOAT-tier cinema we've seen in the century so far. Those were all the things people told him on Twitter, and they weren't always too nice about it. But hey, what do they know? How many movies have those keyboard warriors made, right? As for James, he managed to really irritate some people on Twitter, so he probably considered that a good day. Speaking of Martin, Gunn was actually bold enough to go toe-to-toe with that giant of cinema, coming to the defense of the Marvel Cinematic Universe like an Avenger himself. While promoting his Netflix epic The Irishman, Martin took aim at the MCU, saying that they aren't cinema. In an interview with Empire, he went on to say that with all the production value that goes into Marvel movies, he really sees them more like theme park rides, and that these movies don't do much to give people emotional or psychological experiences. That brought down a lot of heat from across the MCU and the fandom. But Gunn's response felt more emotional than others, writing that Martin is one of his top 5 directors, and while he hated the protests against The Last Temptation of Christ, he was hurt that Martin was doing the same thing to him. Now, Gunn isn't the only fan of Martin's, and his other fans were quick to attack Gunn on Twitter. 2 years later, Gunn got a little more heated, and he flat out accused the cinema legend of using the MCU to promote The Irishman, a movie that wasn't getting half the press a Marvel movie would attract. That's a heck of an accusation, and movie Twitter was back to defend Martin. For his part, Gunn did try to control the outrage on Twitter, writing that he still thinks Martin is the greatest American filmmaker still alive, but that doesn't mean he's right about Marvel movies not being cinema. Now, Gunn doesn't just talk about movies, and he's gotten some heat for things he's done while making movies too, like the accusations of nepotism in his casts. Ever since he was handed the keys to the Guardians of the Galaxy, James has made some high-profile flicks, and people have noticed familiar faces in his movies. For starters, it looks like the guy is always able to find something for his brother, Sean, to do, from playing Kraglin in the Guardians movies, to doing motion capture for that weird weasel character in the Suicide Squad, or doing voice acting or motion capture in his other projects. Jenna Fisher, his first wife, could also count on having a role in his movies, and his current wife, Jennifer Holland, is now in the same boat. Gunn's main defense against these accusations is that Sean was actually famous before he was, since he made his name on Gilmore Girls. But the truth is that it's very common for directors to keep their favorite actors on speed dial. And it isn't just a superhero movie thing either. Just look at how many movies Gunn's nemesis, Scorsese, made with Robert De Niro. And recently, Cillian Murphy opened up about his starring role in Oppenheimer, which came after he played supporting roles in a whole bunch of Christopher Nolan movies. Hollywood people are humans, and they like to work with people they understand and have chemistry with. Of course, there's a reason why James is getting dragged for his casting choices, and it all started when he was placed in charge of the DC Comics movie franchise, where he wound up firing a lot of fan-favorite actors. The old DC Extended Universe didn't have too many successes, but The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker were among the best projects in the entire series, and both were led by Gunn. That led the new management of Warner Bros. Discovery to reboot the DCEU, choosing to put Gunn in charge of the franchise. A lot of people agreed with the decision to start over from the beginning, but the DCEU had its fans, and they weren't happy that Gunn was getting rid of most of the cast. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Momoa were pretty popular choices for Black Adam and Aquaman. And yet, both of them are out of the DC universe now, with Momoa reportedly having the option to come back as a different character, Lobo. There are other characters whose fates are still up in the air. As much as people loved Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman or Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, there's a good chance that they won't be part of the DCU. But the most controversial decision Gunn has made with this franchise so far was to get rid of Henry Cavill, who just made his grand return to the role of Superman in the post-credits scene of Black Adam. Gunn wants to do a younger Superman, and Cavill wouldn't suit the part, which is why he had to let the actor go. James's new role as head of DC Studios actually brings me to the biggest controversy of his entire career, which was how he got fired by Disney. With the first two movies of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Gunn had already made his mark as a top talent in the superhero movie genre. And Kevin Feige, the man in charge of the MCU, was so impressed by what Gunn was doing, he was considering letting him take charge of the entire cosmic side of the Marvel Universe. Not to mention the fact that Gunn was already consulting on every single Marvel movie at the time. But remember how Gunn likes to fire off on Twitter? Yeah, that got him into some serious trouble when he criticized President Donald Trump in 2018, pissing off Trump fans in the process. Conservative commentator Mike Cernovich decided to try and cancel him, and he went back 10 years into Gunn's Twitter profile to dig some pretty horrible tweets that he'd posted at the time. Now, there's no denying that those tweets were really bad, but he'd apologized for them before, and he was quick to apologize again when Cernovich exposed them. It didn't help much, because the movement to cancel had already gotten too strong, and Disney exec Alan Horn took a snap decision to fire Gunn, even though Feige and the cast of the Guardians movies were pushing for him to stay. As tragic as his firing was, Gunn is in a stronger position at DC than he ever was at Marvel. So, I guess he's the one who came out on top in the end. So, from getting fired by Disney over some terrible tweets, to hitting back at Infinity War and Endgame, those were James Gunn's most controversial moments.